He handed me an envelope and said, "Last rent you'll ever get from me." Inside wasn't money, just a photo of us standing on the land he stole. On the back, his handwriting, "Paid in full, not for dirt, for brotherhood." The wind moved through the fields like an old hymn, quiet, but final. Before we begin, subscribe to the channel and tell me where you're watching from in the comments. My name is Clarence. I'm 58 years old, and this is how I learned that silence can speak louder than revenge. The day my brother claimed the land, the sun hit different. It wasn't warm, it was heavy, sitting low over the Georgia dirt like a weight pressing on memory. I stood by the old oak, the one Daddy planted the year I was born, and watched James pull his shiny truck up beside Mama's porch. He didn't wave, didn't look my way, just climbed out, wearing that smug grin that always meant he'd already decided something for both of us. He walked slow, jangling keys, papers folded in his hand. I caught the glint of a county seal before he even spoke. "Got it signed, Clarence," he said. "The land's mine now. You can stop pretending." The air went still. Even the cicadas hushed. That paper, whatever it was, felt like the end of something sacred. I didn't argue. Didn't ask how he'd convinced the lawyer or which cousin he'd charmed into signing witness. I just looked past him, toward the acres Daddy plowed until his back gave out. The soil was dark, proud, and old. You don't scream at land like that. You let it remember for you. Later that night, I sat at the kitchen table under the yellow light, the same bulb that buzzed through our childhood dinners. Mama's Bible was open. I wasn't reading, just thinking. "A man's pride shall bring him low," Proverbs said from the edge of the page. I folded my hands. Pride had already brought James high enough to forget who watered that ground first. I decided right there, no yelling, no fists, no lawyer visits with tempers flaring. My revenge would live quiet, inside paper. Next morning I drove into town. County Courthouse, 8:45 a.m. The clerk knew me. Miss Thomas, silver curls, half glasses, smile like she'd seen too much. "Morning, Mr. Reed. Filing something?" "Yes, ma'am," I said, setting down my folder, "just making sure the family records stay clear." Inside that folder, the deed Daddy signed back in '92, notarized by a man who'd since passed but left his stamp in the archives. And a second paper, a clean legal revision I'd drafted with help from a retired attorney at church. The clause was subtle, a quiet anchor that tied ownership rights to tax payments and occupancy filings. If either broke, title reverted to me. "Filed at the County Recorder's Office, case number 2025-11873, Miss Thomas said as her stamp came down. The sound was soft, but absolute. I walked out slow, sun flashing on the courthouse steps. The air smelled of hot tar and justice you couldn't touch yet. Weeks passed. James put up a new fence. He called it modernizing the property. To me, it looked like he was caging something that had never belonged to him. I kept my distance, but word travels. Folks at the barber shop told me he'd been bragging about building cabins to rent out. "Turning old dirt into money," he'd said. Funny thing about money, it listens to paper. I checked county records every Friday. Patience became my evening ritual. While gospel played low on the radio, I'd mark every update. The title was steady, unbothered. My claws slept inside it, waiting for him to cross the line. One Sunday, Pastor Hill asked me after service, "You good, Brother Clarence? You've been quiet." I smiled. Quiet's where the Lord does his best work. He nodded slow. "Then let him handle it." I already was. That fall, James rented 2 of those cabins to some out-of-towners. Cash deals, no permits filed, no county notice, which meant no tax record. My fingers itched when I saw the empty report at the courthouse kiosk. Silence broke inside me, but only for a second. The trap had sprung. I sent one envelope, no name on the front, just a return address from the clerk's office. Inside, a photocopy of the deed, the clause highlighted in yellow and one line written in my hand. "Ownership requires obedience to law. Rent begins where pride forgets." I signed it C. Reed, Didn't hear back for a week, then another, until one morning a white pickup stopped by my gate. James stepped out slow, hat in hand, eyes sunken. He looked at the house, the field, the fence line, all the things he thought he'd owned. "Clarence," he said quietly, "we need to talk." I leaned against the post. "About what?" He swallowed. "About terms." The wind picked up, rustling dry grass. The sound carried like laughter I wasn't ready to release. "Terms?" I repeated. "You mean rent?" He didn't answer, but his silence did. There's a kind of peace in letting the world correct itself. The same land he stole would now make him pay, season after season, receipt after receipt. Justice didn't shout. It invoiced. That night I sat on the porch, looking out at the dusk. The crickets sang over the hum of his truck in the distance. Somewhere between those sounds, I felt Daddy's presence. Not angry, just proud. When you've spent your life sowing truth, even betrayal can't uproot it. You just wait. The harvest always comes. James didn't show up for 3 days after that talk at the gate. Not a call, not a word. I figured he was waiting on a lawyer to tell him he had some loophole, some fancy excuse that could undo a seal he never cared to read. But the thing about law, when you sign with arrogance, the ink dries twice as fast. By the 4th day, his wife, Denise, came by instead. She parked a little ways down the dirt road, stepping out in her Sunday dress, though it was Thursday afternoon. Her heels sank in the soil as she approached. "Clarence," she said, eyes tired, voice soft. "We didn't mean for it to come to this." I looked out toward the horizon. Didn't mean to steal the land, or didn't mean to get caught. She didn't answer, just held her purse tight, knuckles pale. "He's not sleeping," she said. "Thinks you're trying to ruin him." "I don't have to ruin him," I said quietly. "He signed his own downfall the moment he left family for paper glory." Her eyes watered, but she said nothing more. When she turned to leave, I could hear her whisper something like a prayer. Maybe for peace, maybe for forgiveness. That evening, the sky turned blood orange over the pine trees. I took it as a sign. Harvest was near in more ways than one. At dawn, I went back into town. Courthouse again. Miss Thomas was sipping coffee, flipping through files. "Morning, Mr. Reed. Everything holding steady?" "Yes, ma'am. Just checking compliance." She grinned. "You're the most patient man I've seen file a deed, I'll give you that." "Patience," I said, "keeps a man from fighting battles he already won." The record showed non-payment of property tax from James's end. 90 days overdue. That was the trigger. I filled out one form, notice of ownership reversion, and slid it across the counter. The stamp hit paper. Authority hummed in that quiet room. "Filed and recorded," she said. "Effective immediately." It was done. Silent law. Exact and final. That night I drove back slow. The road dust lifted behind me like smoke. I parked near the fence, stepped out, and felt the hum of crickets under the wide southern sky. In the distance, James's porch light flickered. He was pacing, phone in hand. I didn't need to guess who he was calling. No lawyer could change what had already been filed. When he finally came down the path, I stayed sitting on my porch, rocking slow. "Clarence," he called, "you really did it." I said nothing. He came closer. "You could have just talked to me." "I tried years ago," I said. "You were too busy counting acres that didn't belong to you." He clenched his jaw. "You gonna take the whole place now?" "No," I said, steady. "Just what's mine, and rent for what you've used." He laughed, short and bitter. "Rent? To my own brother?" "Not your brother's doing," I said. "The laws. Case number 2025-10873. You can check it yourself." He froze. I saw it in his eyes, the recognition of a number he'd once ignored, legal truth hitting harder than any argument ever could. He walked off, shoulders heavy, boots dragging through gravel. The sound carried longer than his pride. That weekend, I received a money order in the mail. No note, just the amount due for back rent. I folded it neat, put it in an envelope marked paid. Respect. It wasn't about the money, it was acknowledgement. At the church picnic that Sunday, folks whispered. They'd heard pieces of it, how the Reed brothers had come to a quiet reckoning. Pastor Hill just patted my shoulder and said, "The Lord don't always thunder. Sometimes he signs." I smiled. Yes, he does. But peace didn't come easy. Nights still felt heavy. You don't win over blood without losing something inside. I'd sit out front, the cicadas crying in the dark, thinking about Daddy's words. Land's only good if it holds your family together. Now it held only two men, divided by pride and ink. One afternoon, a county official came by to inspect the boundaries. Routine check. He handed me a document confirming my ownership transfer was finalized. He pointed to the signature line. "Everything's in order, Mr. Reed," he said. Underneath his note, I saw James's name. His signature sat beside the clause accepting tenancy for 1 year, renewable by consent. He'd signed without a fight. The man nodded at my silence. "Some folks learn slow," he said. "Long as they learn," I replied. Weeks passed. James kept to himself. Every first Sunday, a rent envelope appeared in my mailbox, clean and on time. I never cashed the first few, just stored them in a drawer beside Mama's Bible. Proof that patience can bring a man lower than pride ever could. Sometimes I'd see him driving by, slowing near the field. His hand would lift halfway, then drop. I didn't wave either. Some bridges stay half-built for a reason. Then came November. County sent an invitation for property renewal. It required both parties' signatures if rent continued, or if ownership reverted fully. I waited to see which road he'd choose. He didn't call. Didn't come by. But one morning, just as the frost was lifting off the grass, I found the envelope under my door. Inside, the renewal form. Only one signature. Mine. Next to the empty line, a note in his handwriting. "You win, brother. Keep it." I stood there a long time, staring at that line. I folded the paper, walked outside, and looked toward his side of the field. Smoke rose from his chimney, thin and tired. Maybe surrender has its own kind of peace. The land stretched quiet between us, same as always. But now, it breathed different. Free again. The morning after I found James's note, the air felt strange. Lighter, somehow, like the land itself had exhaled. The frost shimmered over the grass, and the first rays of sun slid across the fence he'd built. I stood there with my coffee, steam rising slow, watching light creep over soil that finally remembered my name again. James had given up the fight, but giving up doesn't mean letting go. Not down here, not between brothers. I went to the county recorder's office that same afternoon. The young clerk, a new face, polite but uncertain, looked at the document, then at me. "So you're reclaiming full ownership?" he asked. "Yes," I said, sliding the envelope across. "My brother signed the release." He nodded, pulled the file, and stamped it. The sound was sharp, final. I felt it in my chest like a heartbeat. "Effective today," he said. "Property returned to Clarence Reed." There it was, official again. The same name Daddy had written in his own crooked handwriting 30 years ago. For a second, I could almost hear him laugh from the porch, saying, "Told you, boy, paper lasts longer than pride." Driving home, I passed the field where James's truck once sat. It was empty now. The cabins he'd built looked small against the wide expanse of sky, like little wooden confessions nailed to the earth. When I pulled up to my own gate, there was a man waiting, short, stocky, county badge on his belt. "Mr. Reed?" "Yes, sir." "County inspector," he said, tipping his cap. "Got a letter from your brother. Says he's transferring cabin operations, full closure. You'll need to confirm." He handed me the paper. At the bottom, James's signature again. Legal, witnessed, notarized. The man smiled. "Not many folks do business this clean anymore." "Family makes it messy," I said. "Law makes it clear." That evening I went inside, laid the paper on the kitchen table, and poured myself a drink. Bourbon. Just one glass. The light through the window caught the amber, glowing like the last hour of a hard day. I raised it toward the land outside and whispered, "To quiet victories." But quiet doesn't mean peace. 2 days later, Denise came by again. No makeup this time, hair tied back, shoulders slumped. She looked around the yard before speaking. "He's leaving," she said softly. "Going up to Atlanta. Says there's nothing for him here anymore." I nodded. "Maybe that's for the best." She looked at me, eyes sharp with old pain. "You two could have fixed this, Clarence. All that paper, it killed what little family we had left." I felt the words cut deep. She wasn't wrong. Revenge, no matter how righteous, never comes without cost. "Tell him," I said quietly. "I didn't want war, just respect." She looked like she might cry, then turned and walked back to her car. That night the wind came hard, whistled through the trees like a song from a place I'd forgotten. I stood by the window, watching the branches sway. The cabins creaked in the distance, wood settling like it knew change was coming. By dawn, one of the roofs had blown halfway off. I grabbed my jacket and went down with a hammer and nails. My boots sank in the wet ground. Halfway through fixing the shingles, I saw headlights approach. James's truck. He stepped out slow. No words, no posture. Just picked up a second hammer and climbed up beside me. For an hour, we worked in silence. Nails, wood, rain dripping off the edges. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. When we were finished, he stood looking at the cabin. "Guess I built them too cheap," he muttered. "Guess you built them too fast," I said. He nodded, then looked at me, eyes red but steady. "I didn't know you still came down here." "I never left," I said. "Just waited." He handed me the hammer. "You always were the patient one." We stood there a moment, two men framed by rain and regret. Then he said, "You're going to keep it, right?" "The land?" "I am." He took a deep breath. "Good. It should have always been yours. Daddy knew that." Hearing that broke something open in me. Not anger, not relief, just release. He turned to leave, but stopped halfway to the truck. "You think maybe I could, stop by sometimes? Help with repairs, maybe?" I didn't answer right away. The silence stretched long between us. Then I said, "As long as you come honest." He nodded once. "Fair?" He drove off slow, tires spitting mud. When I got home, I placed Daddy's old photo back on the mantel. He was standing beside that same fence, smiling like a man who'd seen storms and knew the sky always clears. That night, I wrote a short letter, nothing official this time. Just a line from Proverbs that had carried me through. "Through patience, a ruler can be persuaded, and a gentle tongue can break a bone." I sealed it. No address, no stamp. Just laid it in the family Bible, next to the deed. For the first time in years, I slept without hearing the hum of unfinished business. The land was quiet again. Winter came slow that year. The mornings turned silver, frost glazing the grass like memory frozen in time. I'd wake before sunrise, wrap myself in Daddy's old coat, and step out onto the porch with coffee in hand. The world would still be half asleep, quiet, except for the sound of wind moving through the bare pecan trees. It had been 3 months since James left for Atlanta. The fields lay still, but they weren't empty. You could feel history breathing beneath that soil. Every plow, every footprint, every prayer Mama whispered over us when the farm nearly failed. One morning I heard tires crunching down the gravel road. A mail truck stopped by the gate, the driver waving a manila envelope out the window. "Morning, Mr. Reed. Certified mail for you." I signed and brought it inside. The envelope was thick. "Return address, Law Offices of Harper & Lang, Atlanta, GA." For a second, my stomach tightened. Old habits. But when I opened it, the words were different this time. A letter from James's lawyer, not demanding, not contesting, but offering a transfer. Title release. Ownership rights. Clarence Reed, sole holder. Filed voluntarily. Notarized under Fulton County jurisdiction. There was a handwritten note tucked inside, short and shaky. "You were right, Clarence. I built fences when I should have built bridges." "James?" I sat there for a long time staring at that line. The sun had barely broken the horizon, and its light hit the letter just right, turning the ink into a thin shimmer of forgiveness. Later that afternoon, I went to the county office to make it official. Miss Thomas wasn't there. Retired last month. The new clerk, a young brother named Eric, looked at the form, then up at me. "Sir," he said, "you're lucky. Most folks fight for years over land like this." "Luck's got nothing to do with it," I said. "Patience does." He nodded. Respect. When I walked out, I noticed the courthouse flag waving against the sky. For once, I didn't feel small beneath it. The air felt clean, like justice didn't need to shout anymore. That evening, I stopped by the barber shop, the same place I'd gone since I was 15. Mr. Liu, who'd been cutting hair there for half a century, looked up when he saw me. "Well, if it ain't Mr. Landlord himself," he grinned. "Heard your brother made things right." "Somewhat," I said. "Right enough," he laughed. "Sometimes right enough is all you get in this life." The men in the shop nodded. You could tell they knew that kind of victory, the quiet kind, the kind that didn't need applause. After my trim, I walked home under the amber streetlights. The night smelled of wood smoke and barbecue. Somewhere down the block, someone frying catfish. A gospel tune drifted out from an old radio. "His eye is on the sparrow." I hummed along. When I reached home, I saw headlights waiting by my fence. James's truck. My first thought, trouble. But then I saw the passenger seat, his daughter Tiana, my niece. She jumped out and ran up to hug me. "Uncle Clarence," she said, "Daddy said you might show me the farm." James stepped out slowly. His eyes met mine, cautious but sincere. "She's studying agriculture now," he said. "Wants to learn the family land." The words landed like balm on an old scar. I smiled at her. "Then she's come to the right place." For the next hour, I walked them both across the field. Showed her the well Daddy dug, the old pecan rows, the spot where Mama used to hang laundry that caught every bit of summer wind. Tiana asked questions, wrote notes, laughed when she slipped in the mud. James stayed mostly quiet, but I could see something working behind his eyes. Humility, maybe. As the sun dipped, painting everything gold, she asked, "Uncle, why didn't you just fight for it in court?" I looked across the field, hands in my pockets. "Because some fights ain't meant for noise," I said. "You let the truth stand still long enough. Folks trip over it on their own." She smiled, like she understood. Maybe she did. When they drove away, I stood by the fence long after the taillights disappeared. The night air turned cold, but it felt good. Clean. Earned. Later, I sat inside, opened my ledger, and wrote one last entry. Ownership restored. Peace. Optional, but possible. Then I closed it. For the first time in years, the sound of the closing cover didn't echo loneliness. It sounded like an ending. Before bed, I looked out of the window. The cabins were empty now, windows dark. But the land was alive again. It didn't belong to pride anymore. It belonged to memory and to the future. Spring crept in gentle that year. The frost melted into dew, and the air carried that sweet smell of wet soil and pine, the kind of smell that pulls you back to childhood, when everything still felt repairable. The fields were ready for planting again. It had been years since I'd worked them myself, but something in me needed to touch that earth, maybe to remind the land that I was still here, still faithful. I woke early, tied my boots, and rolled the old tractor out of the shed. Its engine coughed before it roared to life, that same stubborn sound Daddy used to call old strength. I drove the rows slow, feeling the vibration through the steering wheel. The soil turned dark and rich under the blade. Sunlight poured over me, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel burdened. I felt free. Halfway through the second row, a car horn sounded from the gate. I cut the engine and looked up. A white sedan. James again. He waved through the fence. "Morning." I hesitated, then waved back. He walked toward me, slower this time, no swagger, just a man standing where pride used to live. Didn't mean to interrupt, he said. Tiana told me you were back out here. Just getting the field ready, I said. Figured it was time. He nodded, then looked across the open acres. Place looks different when you ain't trying to own it. You ever notice that? I smiled faintly. Yeah. You start seeing what it gives instead of what it owes. He rubbed the back of his neck, then reached into his coat, pulled out an envelope. What's this? I asked. Just a gesture, he said. For taxes, upkeep, you don't have to cash it. I didn't take it right away. Money has a way of making peace feel like business, but the look in his eyes told me this wasn't about numbers. It was apology, folded neat inside paper. I'll hold it, I said finally, slipping it into my pocket. For now, he nodded. Fair enough. We stood there a moment, listening to the wind cut through the grass. Then he said, You know, I kept thinking you'd gloat. Tell everybody I lost. Not my style, I said. I just wanted the truth back in the right hands. He laughed softly. Guess you got that from Mama. She always said you were her quiet storm. We shared a silence that didn't hurt this time, just two men breathing the same air without defense. Later that week, I saw Tiana again. She came by with a notebook and a camera, taking pictures of soil and trees for her college project. Uncle Clarence, she said, crouching near a patch of wildflowers. Did you always want to stay here? I thought for a moment. Not always, but this land's got our fingerprints all over it. Leaving it would have been like erasing us. She smiled. Daddy says he understands that now. I looked at her, then toward the horizon where the cabin stood. Maybe he finally does. That Sunday, church felt different. The choir sang louder. The preacher smiled longer. After the service, Pastor Hill walked up and said, I hear the Reed brothers are talking again. I chuckled. A little. He patted my shoulder. The Lord don't always mend fences with nails. Sometimes he just waits for you to walk through the same gate again. After service, James joined us at the fish fry behind the church. Folks were surprised, but polite. He helped serve plates, handed out cornbread, even laughed with old Mr. Lou. I stayed back, watching. There was no pride in his movements, only effort. The kind of effort that means a man's trying to rebuild something invisible. That night I came home with a full stomach and a quiet heart. The porch light glowed soft. I sat in the rocking chair, listening to the frogs down by the creek. I thought about all those nights I'd planned my revenge in silence. Each document, each clause, every careful step. It had all worked exactly as I'd intended. But now that justice had come, I realized revenge doesn't end when the papers are stamped. It ends when peace no longer feels like surrender. The next morning, I drove into town, stopped by the bank, opened a small account under both our names. No credit, no debt, just a trust fund for future taxes on the land. When the clerk asked, You sure you want both signatures required? I said, Yes, I want it fair. He smiled. Most brothers wouldn't do that. Most brothers don't get a second chance, I said. That afternoon I walked the perimeter again. The fence lines were strong now. The grass waved golden under the setting sun. I touched the old oak Daddy planted and whispered, We fixed it, old man. Took us a while, but we fixed it. Somewhere behind me I thought I heard tires crunching. James's truck heading down the road. Slow, steady. Not away this time, but toward what summer arrived with the sound of cicadas and the smell of cut grass. The land hummed with life again. By June the crops had taken root, corn standing tall, beans climbing the wire, and the old peach tree near the shed heavy with fruit. It was the first harvest I'd seen in years that didn't feel like labor. It felt like return. I'd rise before dawn, just like Daddy did, and walk the rows barefoot while the ground was still cool. The dew soaked through my soles, and every step reminded me that justice had a texture, soft, patient, and earned. James started coming by more often. Never announced, never stayed long. Sometimes he'd bring tools, sometimes groceries, sometimes nothing but silence and time. One morning I found him by the fence, tightening the posts where the wood had split. Didn't expect to see you this early, I said. He shrugged. Couldn't sleep. Figured I'd put the time to use. He wiped his brow, looking around. You ever think Daddy'd be proud of us again? Maybe not for what we did, I said, but for what we fixed. He smiled faintly. Yeah, guess that counts for something. It did, more than he knew. By July, the whole town knew about the turnaround. The Reeds, once whispered about like a cautionary tale, had become a story of patience and redemption. People stopped me at the farmer's market, asking how I managed to win without fighting. I'd just smile and say, I read the fine print. But there was one man who didn't smile. Mr. Grayson, the local developer who'd been circling our land for years. He'd offered James a deal long ago, money for half the acreage. That's how the trouble started. So when I saw him at the diner one morning, sliding into my booth uninvited, I knew something was coming. Morning, Mr. Reed, he said, smooth and smug. Heard your brother's back in town. That property of yours must be worth a fortune now that the county's rezoned for residential. I kept stirring my coffee. Land ain't for sale. He leaned forward. Everything's for sale, Clarence. Don't make the same mistake your brother did. I've got an offer that could... I raised a hand. Son, I said no. Twice now. He smirked. Maybe James feels different. That's when I smiled for real. Maybe you should check the deed before you waste gas. He frowned. Meaning? Meaning, I said. The name on that title's mine alone. Case number 2025 11873. Filed, sealed, and quiet. He didn't like that. Left his coffee half full and stormed out. I sat there a moment longer, listening to the hum of the diner. People like him never understand. Ownership isn't just ink, it's legacy. That evening, James stopped by again. Grayson came to see me, he said, kicking dust off his boots. Tried to get me to talk you into selling. I figured he would. What'd you tell him? He grinned. Told him the land's not just dirt, it's memory. And memory don't have a price tag. I nodded, proud. That's the first smart thing you've said in a long time. He laughed. Don't get used to it. We grilled fish that night behind the house, the air thick with smoke and old stories. He told me about Atlanta, the mistakes, the loneliness. I told him about the quiet, the peace, the paperwork that taught me patience. Somewhere in between, laughter returned. Later, as the fire died, he looked at me and said, I didn't just lose land, Clarence. I lost myself in trying to prove I could do it without you. Pride'll do that, I said. But pride's curable. How? Smiled. By paying rent to your own mistakes until they teach you gratitude. He chuckled. Guess I'm all paid up then. Not yet, I said softly. But you're getting there. Days passed into weeks. We worked side by side again, rebuilding what pride had ruined. Fences, sheds, even the porch roof. Folks driving by would honk, waving, surprised to see both Reed brothers in the same frame again. One afternoon, Tiana joined us. She filmed the land for her senior project, Generations of Georgia Soil. She interviewed both of us under the oak Daddy planted. Uncle Clarence, she asked, camera rolling, what kept you from giving up on this place? I looked at her, then at the lens. Because you don't abandon what you're meant to restore. Then she turned to James. And you, Dad, what did you learn from all this? He paused, eyes lowered. That taking something by force means you never really own it. The camera clicked off. But in that silence, we both knew something had shifted for good. That night, I found Tiana's notebook on the porch swing. On the last page, she'd written, Land doesn't divide people, ego does. I smiled. Maybe the land had finally found its voice, through her. By late August, the heat settled over Georgia like a heavy quilt. Cicadas sang in the trees, loud enough to drown out thought, and the red clay roads shimmered under the noon sun. The land baked, but it also bloomed. My crops stood tall, my fences held straight, and peace had roots again. I spent most mornings sitting on the porch, ledger open, noting rainfall and yield, just like Daddy taught me. Routine, quiet, steady. The kind of life that don't make headlines, but builds legacy. James stopped by nearly every week now, sometimes with Tiana, sometimes alone. Always early, always respectful. No more arguments, no more old ghosts, just brothers learning how to share the same sky again. One Saturday, we were fixing the irrigation lines when he said, "You ever think about what happens after we're gone?" I wiped sweat from my brow. "You mean the land?" "Yeah," he said. "I want Tiana to have part of it one day, but only if you agree." I studied his face. There was no demand in his tone, just hope, the kind that comes after a man's been humbled by loss. "I'll think on it," I said. That night I sat by the window watching the fireflies drift through the dark. The world looked peaceful, but the thought lingered. What legacy do we leave behind? A deed? A fence line? Or something quieter, like forgiveness that outlives paperwork? The next morning I drove to town for Sunday service. Pastor Hill preached on Galatians 6:7. "For whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap." His eyes found mine when he said it. I smiled, because I understood now. Justice and mercy grow from the same soil. You just water them differently. After church, Tiana caught up to me. "Uncle Clarence, I'm applying for a scholarship in sustainable farming," she said, excitement lighting her whole face. "They want a family story about land stewardship. Can I use ours?" "Baby," I said, "that story belongs to all of us now. Tell it how it should be told." When I got home, James was already there, repairing a piece of the barn roof. He waved me over. "I heard you gave Tiana permission to tell the story." "Yeah," I said. "It's time the truth got to work for someone." He nodded. "You ever think maybe this land was never about ownership? Maybe it was about teaching us both how to keep something bigger than pride?" I looked around, the trees swaying, the earth breathing, the sound of crickets stitching the air together. "Maybe so," I said. "Some lessons need a long season to grow." That afternoon I went through my files. Old deeds, county letters, tax receipts, each one a record of struggle, patience, and quiet victory. At the bottom of the drawer was the first rent payment James ever sent, still uncashed. I held it for a moment, then smiled and slipped it into an envelope labeled "Paid in Full." The next day I drove to his place. He was sitting on the porch, guitar in hand, strumming a slow blues tune that sounded like something Daddy might have played. "What brings you out this way?" he asked, and I handed him the envelope. "Debt's cleared," I said. "All of it." He opened it, looked at the money order, then at me. "You serious?" "Yeah. You paid enough already. Pride's a heavy rent." He laughed quietly, shaking his head. "You always did have a way of turning lessons into bills?" "Only the ones that matter," I said. He stood, reached out his hand. For a second I thought he meant to shake it, but instead he pulled me into a hug. It wasn't long, just solid, real, the kind of hug that closes a long chapter. That night I wrote in my ledger again, only one line this time. Balance settled. No arrears between blood. Weeks passed, smooth and simple. The county fair came around, same one Daddy used to take us to when we were boys. I hadn't been in decades, but Tiana insisted we go. When we got there, I saw the old Ferris wheel spinning slow, the scent of fried dough and kettle corn thick in the air. James was waiting by the livestock pens, smiling in that easy way I hadn't seen since we were kids. He pointed to a display at the community booth. "Look familiar?" Pinned up under the local heritage award banner was a photo of our land. Sunset over the old oak, Tiana standing in the field with her notebook. Underneath it read, "The Reed family, preserving generations through patience." I stood there, heart thudding slow and deep. "Did you know about this?" I asked. He shook his head. "Nope." Tiana submitted it. She wanted folks to see what happens when family stops fighting and starts planting. We didn't speak for a long while. Just watched that photo glowing under the fair lights, surrounded by laughter, the smell of popcorn, and the hum of something sacred. Restoration. Before we left, Tiana came running over with a ribbon in her hand. "We won second place," she said, waving it proudly. "Second?" I teased. "Guess the judges don't know what real inheritance looks like." She laughed, hugging us both. "Doesn't matter. The story's out there now." And standing there between my brother and his daughter, I realized she was right. Some victories don't need first place, they just need witness. Autumn rolled in wearing gold and rust. The wind turned cooler, the sky softened, and the evenings stretched longer than they used to. The fields glowed like old copper beneath the sun, every stalk and leaf whispering its thanks to the soil that had finally found peace. Harvest season always brings memory. You can't pick from the earth without thinking about the hands that planted before you. Mama's apron, Daddy's straw hat, the sound of their laughter carried in the hum of the field. I could almost hear it again as I loaded the crates of peaches into the truck. That afternoon, James drove up. He stepped out wearing work gloves, looking more like the man who once shared my chores than the one who'd stolen my inheritance. "Need a hand?" he asked. "Grab a crate," I said. "Plenty to do." We worked without talking for a while, just the sound of fruit hitting wood and the creak of the old truck bed. Finally, he said, "I talked to Tiana's professor. He wants to visit the farm. Says her paper caught the university's attention." I raised an eyebrow. "That right?" He grinned. "She's calling it Silent Land, Loud Lessons. Said the title was inspired by you." That made me laugh, a deep, quiet laugh that came from someplace real. Guess my silence finally spoke loud enough. The day of the visit came bright and clear. The professor was a kind man, maybe mid-50s, with a gentle voice and eyes that saw details most folks missed. He walked the land with Tiana, asking about crop rotation, sustainability, history. At one point, he turned to me and said, "You've preserved something rare here, Mr. Reed. This isn't just a farm, it's heritage." "Heritage takes paperwork and patience," I said with a smile. He laughed. "Sounds like both of which you've mastered." That night, Tiana showed me her edited video project. It opened with a slow pan across the field, sunlight spilling over the oak tree. Then my voice, recorded without me even realizing she'd done it, played over the image. "You don't have to raise your voice to prove you're right. Just stand where truth was planted and let time do the talking." I sat there listening, watching scenes of the land, James mending the fence, Mama's old chair rocking in the breeze. It felt strange, like seeing your own heart from a distance. The video ended with one final frame. The deed, stamped and sealed, resting beside the family Bible. Beneath it, her caption read, "Justice isn't revenge, it's restoration." I had to step outside after that. The sky was clear, the stars thick as salt scattered across black velvet. I breathed deep, feeling the weight of years finally ease off my shoulders. A few days later, the county invited us to a heritage ceremony. They wanted to honor families who kept ancestral land within their lineage. I didn't care much for ceremonies, but James insisted we go. The courthouse was dressed in flags and flowers. When they called our name, the Reed Family Fulton County Legacy Award, James nudged me forward. I accepted the plaque, gold lettering catching the light. When they handed me the microphone, I spoke plain. "We lost our way for a while, but land don't leave you. It waits. And when you come back honest, it forgives." The room was quiet for a long second, then full of applause. Later, as we stepped outside, James said, "You always did have a preacher's timing." I smiled. Maybe, but this time, the sermon was about both of us. We drove home in near silence. The truck hummed steady over the dirt road. The horizon burned orange behind the trees, and I realized something I hadn't before. Revenge ends when legacy begins. That night, I placed the plaque beside the deed and Mama's Bible. 3 generations, 1 shelf. Then I sat on the porch, listening to the crickets, thinking about how far a man can travel without ever leaving home. By November, the wind carried the smell of pine and smoke. Evenings came early, shadows stretching long across the fields. The land slept slow, peaceful now, as if it too was healing from the wounds we gave it. James had started coming by every Sunday evening. Not for work, not for talk, just to sit. He'd bring coffee in a thermos, sometimes pie from the diner, sometimes nothing at all. We'd sit on the porch, 2 men who'd learned that silence could be holy when you earned it. One Sunday, as the sun dipped low and the crickets began their song, he said, "I've been thinking about making things official." I looked at him. "Official how?" "I want to add your name to my will," he said. "Everything I've got, what little it is, ought to circle back to family. You kept the land alive. You should have the rest of it, too." I took a slow breath. "That's not necessary, James." He shook his head. "Maybe not, but it's right." For once, I didn't argue. Some gestures don't need correcting. They just need to land where they belong. That week we met at the notary's office in town, the same one where I'd filed the deed years ago. Funny how justice sometimes brings you back to the same chair, same desk, same smell of ink and wood polish. The notary looked up and smiled. "Well, Mr. Reed, it's been a while. Still keeping things in order?" "Always," I said. James signed first, hands steady. I signed after, the weight of the pen heavier than I remembered. When it was done, we both stood there quiet, watching the ink dry. Outside, the afternoon light hit the courthouse steps just right. He looked over and said, "Guess that's the last bit of paper between us." "Good kind of paper," I said. He nodded. "Yeah, the kind that don't divide." A few weeks later, Tiana called me from her dorm. "Uncle Clarence," she said, voice full of excitement, "they accepted my project. I'm getting a scholarship to study community farming initiatives in Mississippi." I smiled so wide it hurt. "Your daddy must be proud." "He is," she said. "He cried when he read the acceptance letter. First time I've ever seen him do that." After we hung up, I sat by the window a long time. The night outside was calm. The fields lay in silver quiet under the moon. That December, our church hosted a Thanksgiving drive. Turkeys, canned food, blankets. James volunteered to help. He showed up in his old denim jacket, sleeves rolled, smile ready. Folks greeted him like they'd been waiting years to see that version of him again. During cleanup, Pastor Hill pulled me aside. "You see what you did?" I frowned. "Did?" He nodded toward James, who was laughing with the choir ladies. "You planted a seed in silence, and now your brother's growing again." I looked over at him, his laughter rising like music through the cold air. "I didn't plant it," I said. "The land did. I just stopped fighting it." That night he and I sat on the porch one more time. The stars were sharp against the sky, and the smell of pine wrapped around us. "You ever think about what it all meant?" he asked. "All what?" "The fight, the papers, the years we lost." I thought about it for a long time before answering. "Maybe it meant we had to learn patience the hard way. Some lessons don't fit in Sunday school." He chuckled softly. "Guess not." The porch light flickered, wind rustling the pecan trees. I turned to him and said, "You know, I never wanted to beat you. I just wanted you to see what fairness looked like." He nodded. "I see it now." And then, with the quietest smile, he said, "You ever think maybe God used the deed to teach both of us mercy?" I looked out across the dark fields, the land breathing slow beneath the stars. "Yeah," I said. "He wrote it in fine print." Winter settled deep over Georgia. The mornings came pale and still, the ground cold enough to crunch under your boots. The trees stood bare, their branches black against a silver sky. The farm had gone quiet again, but it wasn't an empty silence anymore. It was peace, hard-earned, gentle peace. I woke early, brewed my coffee, and sat on the porch wrapped in my old flannel. From there, I could see the whole field, the oak, the cabins, the fences. Every piece of it carried a chapter of our story. Some written in ink, some in sweat, some in forgiveness. James came by just after sunrise. His breath showed in the cold, a wisp of white every time he exhaled. "Morning," he said, handing me a small envelope. "What's this?" I asked. He grinned. "Last piece of rent I'll ever pay." I opened it, expecting a check. Instead, it was a photo. The three of us, me, him, and Tiana, standing by the oak during harvest. On the back, he'd written, "Paid in full. Not for land, for brotherhood." I sat there a long time, holding that picture. The sun came up slow, warming the frost off the grass. And I realized something simple and true. I'd been chasing justice, but what I'd found was restoration. We spent that day walking the property, checking fences, talking about everything and nothing. He told me Tiana would be heading to Mississippi in a week, that she wanted to come back one day to run the farm. I told him that's exactly what I'd hoped for. At one point, we stopped near the edge of the field, where the old boundary markers still stood. The same spot where our first argument began years ago. The place where he'd declared it his land. He looked down at the marker and said, "Funny how this little line caused so much pain." "Lines only matter when you forget what they're supposed to protect," I said. He nodded. "Guess we both crossed a few we shouldn't have." "Yeah," I said, "but we also came back." We stood there for a while, quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't ache anymore. That evening, we built a fire out back, just like we used to when we were boys. Tiana called from school while we sat there. Her voice came through the speaker, bright and clear. "Daddy," she said, "they want to feature our story in the university journal. The dean called it a modern parable of land and legacy." James laughed, shaking his head. "Guess your old man finally did something worth printing." She giggled. "You both did. Uncle Clarence, too." After the call ended, we sat listening to the fire crackle. The smell of burning pine mixed with the cold air. He leaned back and said, "You ever think about selling a piece? Maybe to fund her project?" I looked at him, smiling. "No need. The land will fund itself. It always has, as long as it's worked with clean hands." He nodded. "You sound just like Daddy." "Guess that's not the worst thing to be," I said. Later that night, after he left, I walked the field one last time before bed. The moon hung low, painting everything silver. The earth beneath my boots was cold but solid, steady, like a promise that had finally been kept. I stopped under the oak, laid my hand against its bark, and whispered, "We did it." And in that moment, I realized the land had never been about money, ownership, or revenge. It had been about legacy, about the quiet kind of love that waits for brothers to remember they share the same roots. As I turned back toward the house, the porch light glowed warm against the night. I could almost hear Daddy's voice carried in the wind. "You hold the land right, boy, and the land'll hold you back." He was right. It did. If this story spoke to you, like the video, subscribe, and share your thoughts below.